parity, and I'm pitching a far more broader proposal of something along the lines of a green Marshall Plan for climate-stressed countries, including but not limited to Pakistan, with one amongst the 10 most climate-stressed countries on the planet. All of us have contributed negligible to
Right.
the overall carbon footprint. We all can't afford the mitigation and adaptation infrastructure that we need to deal with the times to come. There's been pledges by the international community, and they haven't been able to live up to their own pledges of coming up with $100 billion a year to
Right.
tackle climate change. But I believe that we can provide solutions for that in the form of debt swaps and other such out-of-the-box solutions, which can allow us to focus on reconstruction and rehabilitation, because it's our dream as well to be able to build back, but not only build back better, build back greener, build back more climate
Right.
resilient
So, Foreman, so
manner.
I want to come back to climate change resilience later in this interview, but since I was going through the geopolitics of the situation, you mentioned the hyphenation of AFPAC, and I understand that things have changed, but if the two are now properly dehyphenated, I have to ask, when America orchestrated the killing of Ayman al-Zawahiri, what level of cooperation did your country offer?
I mean, it wasn't in our country, nor was it in our information that this individual was there, or that there was an operation that was going to go on to take him out.
And did Pakistan offer its airspace to America for
No,
counter?
as I said, we were not sort of aware of this. I don't think anybody
Oh,
was. He was there until after it happened.
I see. So, given that we're talking about America, I want to sort of route us a little bit to China and the broader question of geopolitics and aid. And, Beijing and Islamabad have become much friendlier in recent years. And your predecessors called the Pakistan-China relationship a quote, all-weather friendship, which I think is also a dig at a fair-weather friend in America. But China hasn't quite come to Pakistan's aid in a big way this year in its greatest moment of need. Is that right?
No, that's absolutely incorrect. First of all, our relationship with China is not new. It has long roots, cross sort of bipartisan roots. And I like to say that we wanted to be friends with China when nobody wanted to be friends with China. And now everybody wants to be friends with China. And we're still where we were standing at the
Not in America.
start of this relationship. Well, I would argue that it would be in our interest for us to cooperate on that front, but let's not get into that debate. As far as helping Pakistan, China has helped Pakistan whenever we have been in difficult times, whether it's as soon as we came into power, the new coalition government. There were some wrong decisions taken before us coming in that left us in a precarious economic situation. The life-saving decisions for our economy were done first and foremost by China. As far as our floods are concerned, not only the immediate aid relief, because I've had very brief interactions with them, but as far as our loan payments are concerned, we've already had conversations on that. But I think this is the ironic thing. Not everything is about the geopolitical conflict of the US and China. And I think it's preposterous that we're even having a conversation while talking about my country's survival and our ability to deal with cataclysmic flooding. We're comparing sort of how is the US, how is that's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, please, surely we will be unable to confront climate change if the
Of
United
course.
States and
No,
China
but
don't work
Prime Minister,
together.
the reason why I bring up China is because, if you look at Sri Lanka, for example, Sri Lanka will say it wasn't able to get the help from China that it needed. So it is a valid question, I think, for many South Asian smaller countries to wonder, whether they're getting the aid from China that, they may have been promised before.
So as far as Sri Lanka is concerned, obviously we're a completely different context. Uh, Sri Lanka went through an economic crisis. We're going through a climate catastrophe. I can't speak to their relations with any one
And an
country.
economic crisis.
Obviously, sorry,
And an economic crisis as well, I would argue, right?
sorry.
I was just going to say, your country is struggling both with a climate crisis and an economic
Yes,
one.
but in the sense that that was solely an economic crisis of its own dynamics, and this one is obviously thrown out ones of its own sort of
Mm.
nature. And as far as what China does, and whether it's with Sri Lanka or Pakistan, that's totally China's decision, just like it's 100% the US's decision. What they do in either of these circumstances. I don't like to see our relationships as mutually exclusive. I see them standing alone. And rather than being a point of competition or a venue for these divisions to be exacerbated, I would like Pakistan to continue to play a role that we have done in the past. And Pakistan originally played bridge between China and the United States, resulting in diplomatic relations between the two countries. And right now, particularly when we're drowning in floods, I don't want to play any part in exacerbating any tensions or being a sort of a geopolitical football in this chaos. I would much rather that even in this time of great geopolitical divisions, to play that role of a bridge and
I understand.
perhaps
And of course, your
encourage
country needs all the help it can get.
and perhaps play that role of uniting these two great powers around working together for climate change. I'm sure we can all agree that if China and the United States don't work together on climate, then we're not going to succeed in combating climate change. So perhaps Pakistan's unique position as a friend both of the United States and of China could encourage cooperation on this front, rather than what I find is sort of in vogue over here about competition.
I understand that. So on a related note, then, we haven't talked about Russia's war in Ukraine, and of course, former Prime Minister Imran Khan was in Moscow on the very day Putin announced his invasion of Ukraine. That was a different administration, of course. Today, where does your government stand on the war? Do you feel like it's time to clearly condemn Moscow?
I think that there's broad consensus within Pakistan that we don't want to get dragged into this conflict, particularly because we're just coming out of a decades-long conflict in Afghanistan, and frankly, we're just exhausted of what war does, the consequences for any one country, for the neighborhood. And we've been very careful, whether it's the last administration or this administration, not to be drawn in to the conflict in any international forum.
I understand being drawn in. My question,
what we have tried to do is add a level of nuance to this dynamic ever since that we've taken over. And for example, before the climate catastrophe that we're now facing, Pakistan was anyway largely an aid recipient country, but there are two countries that we provided aid to. One is Afghanistan, and the other was Ukraine, to help mitigate the difficulties that the people over there are facing.
The reason why I asked your question was not to embroil Pakistan in the conflict.
No, that's not your question. I mean that our conduct on the international, your question is going to keep coming. I mean, our conduct on the international stage, particularly within international organizations, has been such to try and avoid being drawn into this conflict.
I'll just note that India's Prime Minister Modi recently chided Putin for continuing the war. That may be something, at least in the West, people are looking to as if India and China were to pressure Russia, that may change things a little bit. I want to sort of bring up one more issue that we haven't gotten to yet, and that is, of course, the question of Pakistan's army. I bring this up with some caution. I know you haven't said much about them on your visit so far, but are you able to tell us a bit about who the next army chief might be, and what that might mean for civil-military relationships, just given how defining that's been in your country's past?
I think that that's a valid question. The decision as to who will be the next army chief will be taken by the Prime Minister of Pakistan. I wouldn't want to preempt his decision on this, which should be coming pretty soon. But I think that it's important that whatever the decision may be, it follows the framework, not only the legal framework, but also the precedents of seniority, etc.
I understand that. You know, I've been covering Pakistan for many years, foreign minister, and one thing that comes up quite often is the military's role in the economy, the military's role in government. And it's fair to say in some senses that, you know, it's very difficult to envision structural reforms to Pakistan's economy or its government as long as it has an all-powerful army. What's your sense of the army's role circa 2022, and where do you see it moving forward in relationship with you now that you're in government?
So absolutely, our history has been a turbulent one, and the role of our armed forces beyond. I mean, as you say, powerful armed forces. I think any country wants a powerful armed forces, but we, along as others, have long advocated for institutions within Pakistan all institutions within Pakistan sort of conducting themselves within their legal mandate and transitioning away from the more controversial roles that we've had in the past. I think a significant development here, the developments of April earlier this year, where the no confidence against Imran Khan was successful, and for the first time in our history, through a constitutional democratic means, we managed to remove a prime minister. Of course, you as someone who's been following Pakistan's history will know that that has never happened before. All
Right.
prime ministers who have been removed have either been done so by being hanged, by being exiled, by some sort of judicial verdict. So that's a significant point in Pakistan's political history, institutional development, democracy, that we do so through a constitutional manner. And if that indicates that our armed forces or our institutions are transitioning from what was a controversial role to a constitutional role, that should be encouraged across the board. Unfortunately, particularly on behalf of our opposition, rather than being encouraged, it's being outright condemned. And sort of an overt intervention is being solicited in favor of our political rivals, which is obviously not in the interest of Pakistani democracy. It's not in the interest of the army as an institution. And I do hope we continue on this path where we transition away from unconstitutional, controversial roles to constitutional and legal roles, which over time should see a reduction of space taken in civilian matters.
Right. I hope so too. I'm going to ask you a related question. Um, there is obviously democracy and its trajectory in Pakistan, but there's also, I guess, an issue here in that you come from a dynasty of leaders. Your prime minister also a very famous family name in Pakistani politics. Um, does dynastic politics, and this is not unique to Pakistan, it's quite common around the world, even here in America. Do you feel that holds democracy back in any way?
Well, I suppose which dynasty? Because we have sort of a lot of figures in Pakistani politics whose families are associated with the periods of dictatorship that we have experienced, and who seek through their political careers to advance undemocratic steps within Pakistan's system. I can speak for myself rather than others. I come from a political family, most certainly, who has consistently struggled for civilian supremacy and democracy in Pakistan. And I personally sort of did not choose to propel myself in this direction. So events took a certain course, but it all is rooted back to the fact that my mother was assassinated before her time. And as a result of which, we took on these responsibilities with the hope that we'd be able to complete her unfulfilled mission. I do hope that we move away from a time when where such sorts of executions and assassinations propel the nature of our politics. In that case, I think most certainly you wouldn't have seen me in the position I am at the
But
time.
and I push you here a little bit. I once actually asked your mother the also when right before she was prime minister the very same question about 15 years ago, a very eloquent answer from her. But if you look at the trajectory then of democracy in Pakistan, are you optimistic about where it's headed? Do you think it served the country?
Oh, absolutely. I think every time we've had civilian governments, we've made political advancements. Whenever our party has been in power, we've not only expanded human rights, labor rights, media freedoms, but constitutional rights, devolved power away from individuals, be it the president, even the prime minister, to its parliament, and then beyond parliament to the provinces. Unfortunately, we've never had the uninterrupted progression of democracy that we deserve. And I think through such evolutions, well, you know, mistakes will be made. You have like a sort of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back sort of approach to the system. So I don't know, to say democracy, how well has democracy served Pakistan? I think democracy is the only answer. And no matter how weak a democracy is, even the worst and weakest form of democracy is better than any dictatorship. And democracy is just as good as it is for Pakistan, as it is for anywhere else in the world.
I understand that. Of course, your country has had many interruptions to democracy, so I understand where you're coming from. I want to circle back to climate change. The world is very sympathetic about your country's plight right now, about the floods and the ripple effects they're having. You have now, over the last week or so, called for climate reparations, for a green Marshall Plan. Just give us a sense. I mean, how would any of this work? Because your country isn't the first to make these calls. COP27 is coming up. There are a lot of hopes there, but also those hopes have been dashed at previous COPs.
They have been. I don't think that necessarily because hope's been dashed, we should stop trying. I haven't gone as far as reparations. I have talked about climate justice, however, and I would, rather than seeing it as a contradiction, I would see it as a continuation, as the stated position of the President of the United States, of the leaders of many countries in Europe, that we need to invest, get the money together, not only for climate adaptation domestically, but also internationally. And within that context, I propose a green Marshall Plan for climate-stressed countries, all of which contribute negligibly to the global carbon
Who would fund this?
The great polluters who have caused this crisis, but to expect that there's money just knocking around to be spent at this, I understand that's not there. We have to come up with out-of-the-box solutions, one of which is the proposal of a debt swap for climate, where countries that owe debt to the great polluters would swap this debt
for
their climate.
Out of curiosity.
Well, I'm here, so obviously I'm talking to my partners here and in Europe and in other places. But the idea is, let's just say those countries that have committed to providing $100 billion annually in financing for climate and have been unable to do so. My novel suggestion to them is, if they don't have access to hard cash, one proposition is a debt swap. But I also understand that this isn't a solution that will only be in the G2G or the public sector space. We have to find private sector solutions for this problem as well, and encourage the private sector to invest in climate adaptation. I believe that the public-private partnership model that we in the past have used for not so clean energy in my province of Sindh, or in Pakistan in general, for our infrastructure, could be adapted, and not only for green energy, but also for green infrastructure.
Let's just talk about food for a minute. I know that given that the crisis your country is facing has so many ripple effects, this is a question from one of our subscribers, Dakota Burkholder, who wants to know what new policies your government plans to introduce or implement to make sure people get food.
So we have this is the scary consequence of what's happening. I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but at the risk of repetition, so 4.3 million acres of standing crop, cash crop, destroyed as a result of these floods. And in 2 months' time, we were to do our wheat sowing, which is looking increasing unlikely. Last time around, 2010, 2011 floods, we had the hit of the damages of the floods, but we managed to get ourselves back on our feet in time to plant the next crop and actually have a bumper crop. This time, that's looking incredibly difficult. And as you're aware, it's not just the context of our of the flooding that has caused food insecurity questions. We were already faced with issues about food insecurity, particularly following what's happening in the Ukraine. I mean, we used to buy a lot of our wheat from Ukraine, so there was a lot of complexities around this issue then. Our strategy at the moment is we're providing as much as we can as far as rations are concerned. We've also got sort of the international community, the World Food Program, USAID, everybody supporting on that front. Our aim is to try to do whatever we physically is possible to get our infrastructure, if not fully functional, but at least functional enough to allow as many people as possible to plant that next crop. And that, I think, is the best way for us to not only to get them back on their feet, but to mitigate the damage to our economy. It is a Herculean task, but we're working around the clock to try and achieve it.
Very much hope you can. You've spoken quite eloquently about democracy. I'm a journalist, so I have to ask. It's been widely reported that your country and your government has had a media crackdown in recent months. A TV channel has been shut down, journalists have been harassed. This isn't new in Pakistan, of course, but it hasn't stopped under your leadership. Why?
No, absolutely. I mean, we've only been in power for 4 months, and the sort of difficulties that Pakistani press freedom has faced over the past 4 years have been exponential. As I mentioned, I don't know, sort of between 2007 and 2018, we actually saw an expansion around rights within the Pakistani context. I was particularly proud of the period between 2007 and 2008, when we were 2008 and 2013, when we were last in power. We could proudly say we had no political prisoners, where the media was, no matter sort of whatever they said or whatever was happening, we never went after them, and we'd managed to create an equilibrium in Pakistani politics and said goodbye to political victimization. Unfortunately, as Mr. Khan came into power, he undid a lot of the progress we've made on that front. He proposed legislation.
But these are still shutdowns that have happened with the new government.
I'm not denying that. I'm denying that, absolutely. So he set sort of proposed legislation that would sort of, if there's any criticism of our armed forces or other things, would result in legal consequences, not only for journalists, but for TV channels. He was the first to shut down TV channels and media groups when he was in power. And once you put those norms, those rules, those laws in place, it takes more than 4 months to walk those back. But I would like to communicate to you our commitment to media freedoms and to the freedom of the press, and we will consistently work to improve the environment in Pakistan. It's absolutely not where we would like to see it, where I would like to see it, but to expect that within the space of 3 or 4 months, we'd be able to reverse these assaults, these changes to our norms, to our rule book, to our framework. That's also unrealistic.
We'll hold you to that. Last question, just coming back to the floods. Are you getting any help from India?
No.
Do you expect any help from India?
No.
If you could say something to the Indian foreign minister or the Indian audience listening in, what would you say?
No, if I could say something, I would say to you, look, this is their sort of choice, their position. It's not something that...
Have you asked for help?
No, I've not, to be honest, I haven't asked for help from everyone. I didn't even ask for help from the United States. They volunteered. They didn't ask for help from China. They volunteered. They didn't ask for help from the Middle East. They volunteered. I mean, in times of human catastrophe, I think it tests everyone's humanity.
We'll leave it there. Bilawal Bhutto, Pakistan's foreign minister, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you on FP Live. Hope to have you back soon. And that's it for our discussion today. Remember